Welcome to the Why God Why podcast. My name is Peter Englert. I am here with our illustrious co-host, Aaron Mercer. Hello.
All right, illustrious. We'll take it.
And we have the Josh Allen of producers, who's Colin Raymond for his rookie year. So we're glad to have him. Aaron, today we are interviewing Jen Pollock-Michel, who is the author of a number of books, including Lord Teach Us to Want and A Habit Called Faith. But the question we're asking her today is, why does time management make us time anxious?
Yeah, I'm excited about this this conversation. I think it's going to be good. It's something that many of us are often thinking about, time and not having enough time, and why do we feel that way? So anyhow, I'm very much looking forward to this and looking forward to the insights here. And we're just so glad to have you on the podcast. Would love to. I don't know. I wonder. Would you mind, Jen, just kind of giving us, quick introduction to you and how you. Well, first of all, how you got into writing all these great books, and also maybe, why time is on your mind.
Time is on my mind because, it's long been on my mind just because I have 5 kids. I have,
I knew you were going to say that.
How can you not think about time when you have 5 kids and, you want to do something other than just laundry and dinner, which are wonderful things. But, in order to make any time to write books, it's obviously been I would actually even almost call it an obsession. I've been reading time management books forever. I was raised in a Christian home, thankful for that. I would say that I really started following Jesus when I was 16. And I can remember, honestly, my first time management book that I read in college. I stole it from my roommate's shelf. And even though I guess it wasn't exactly a time management book, but it was definitely one of those books. It was a Christian discipleship book about how to just organize your life, and part of that was organizing your calendar, and that made a lot of sense to me. It made a lot of sense to me to think that time was just one of those resources that I needed to steward well. And so that sort of catapulted me into decades long interest in reading time management books. I can remember when I was a young mom and I had a friend who introduced me to David Allen, Getting Things Done. Most people who are time management people know all about David Allen. And even in the beginning of the pandemic, I started rereading all of those, kind of thinking I got to get a better handle on time. So yeah, it's just been a long interest for me.
Oh, I was going to say it must be a good interest, and also something you've definitely implemented well, because I have 3 kids, so I can imagine with 5, how you even get to read about it over again, and then also making sure you have the time to write about it. So I'm impressed already. This can only go uphill from here. This is great.
Well, Jen, based on what Aaron said, I want to have a little fun with you. So we interviewed Ashley Hales, who wrote the book A Spacious Life. And when I talked with Ashley, it was have a Sabbath, have margin. And then when you and I talked, I was oh yeah, Jen is because you're we got to figure out this time hack. And I say that because you're both great friends. And I guess, we have some people here that they might be type B, a little bit more relaxed when it comes to time. And then there's some of us that kind of live on, adrenaline. I love days that are packed with meetings, moving back to back. So I guess as you kind of come at this as a little bit more type A, what are the biggest problems that you see with someone that's type A that wants to get a lot of stuff done, that maybe it's kind of the opposite of Ashley?
I think the biggest thing is that productivity kind of becomes your standard for a good day. How do you know your day was good? It was good because you got a lot of things done, because you got through that list, you checked everything off. And, that is a really, well, first of all, you can get things done, and you can get them done in a lot of wrong ways. You can be super irritable getting through your to-do list. You can be really angry. You can be really resentful. So just getting through your to-do list doesn't really actually say anything about the state of your heart, which seems to be something that God is intensely preoccupied with. What's the state of our heart as we do things? We could be getting things done very anxiously, very frenetically. We could actually just be doing a lot of things sort of halfway too, just in order to get things done. And so I think that for me was almost one of the biggest learning curves of the book, was just reassessing this whole criterion of productivity. Like, does this even make sense of what the Christian life is about? And really, when you look at the history of productivity, you see that it's pretty recent. It's pretty much as recent as, we could probably say it's as recent as the clock, but I would say even people would say that's very old, but it hasn't been with us forever, maybe 13th, 14th century. But really, honestly, I think productivity is more a product of the Industrial Revolution, where we start to think about machines and what they can produce. And then we start to measure human output by those same standards, how fast, how efficiently can humans work. And I think that's where we really get into a lot of trouble.
Oh. Wow, that's really interesting. No, I love the talk about the clocks and the Industrial Revolution. I think that's really fascinating to think about. I would love to dive into that more. I am curious, like, even starting off this conversation, and maybe where you have come from when you started researching this, even way back when you took your roommate's book in college. But certainly since you've been writing. From a foundational, fundamental, at the very beginning, do you view time do you take it as a scarce resource? Like, is it, I guess what I'm trying to get at here is, I think people probably have different views of time. You're definitely talking about being productive with time, which makes me think, okay, time is limited. Can you dig into that a little bit more, and maybe have you found that other people feel similarly, and what's the pluses and minuses of both of those things?
It's a really good question, because we haven't always viewed time the same way. I would probably say that none of us escapes thinking about time as instrument. Time is something that you can sort of measure and then mete out, according to your goals and to your ambitions. This is just honestly just a product of having a clock. Imagine like before you even had a clock and you could measure hours and minutes and seconds, and now you can measure like zeptoseconds, I think is a really small unit of time that we can now measure. You maybe didn't have as much anxiety about what you were supposed to do with all those units of time. Right. Imagine like when you look at your wallet and you see dollar bills, like you feel as if like now you've got to be responsible for them and spend them in wise ways. And time becomes currency when it's something that we can measure. And it's interesting. We've measured time a lot longer than we've had the clock. I read this one really great book about just all different kinds of ways that people measure time. The sundial and the hourglass and water clocks. A water clock I think existed, back when Augustine was writing. And Augustine in the 4th century and 5th century is having all of his own anxieties about time. So I think time anxiety predates the clock, for sure. But I think now that we have the clock, and now that we have ways to measure output of work, it sort of drives us to feel really anxious about that, to feel that, and it leaves us honestly thinking that we should move like machines. And I think that's where it gets really problematic, because the human body isn't a machine, it's why you can't just, tune up the machine and keep it running 24/7. Like you do need to sleep, right, and you do need to take Sabbath. So I think this whole book was an unlearning and a relearning to think about time in ways that are far bigger and I think more beautiful and actually a lot more hopeful than time as instrument, time as currency, time as money. Because I think ultimately as a Christian, what we really believe is that there is enough time. There's not enough time in this life. There's not. You know, we know that our days pass like a breath, like a shadow. And yet somehow in God's kingdom, there's enough because he is outside of time. You know, he's the beginning and the end and the beginning again, really, in Christ.
You know, I want to come back. That's huge. But one kind of question about time and anxiety before we kind of go into what's uniquely Christian about time. So, you know, we're talking about time anxiety, and I just wonder for you personally, but also as you've observed, you know, today in the state of New York, I don't want to get super controversial. It was the first day that schools didn't allow masks. And it's just kind of this crazy reminder that we had a view of time and anxiety in the pandemic. What do you think is going to happen, or what are you sensing now that we might be seeing quote unquote light at the end of the tunnel? And I realize I say that anything can change. We've been through a lot. But what do you see in the pandemic, how our views on time and anxiety changed versus now that we might have light at the end of the tunnel? How did that for you personally, and what are some bigger themes that you're picking up?
I would say this whole book really is, the arc of it is the pandemic, you know, because early in the pandemic, for me, I felt all the anxiety of not just the crisis, not just, you know, the questions of like, will we get sick? You know, what will change about our lives, you know, in those really early months? Not just that, but just the disruption of time. Like all of a sudden, I'm not leaving my house. I don't have all of these regular ways to pattern a day and a week and honestly, even a month. You know, you're not celebrating the occasions that you would normally celebrate. You're not going to church. You know, these things, these ways that I had normally relied on to pattern my time, they were all gone. And so I felt a lot of anxiety about that. And I wasn't exactly sure why. You know, I mean, I actually was surprised because I thought I should feel relief. All of a sudden, I'm not as busy as I once was, you know, because my kids are older. I know a lot of people were far busier than they were before, but my kids were older. I wasn't having to, like, I had more time. I wasn't traveling. A lot of work responsibilities had canceled for me. So I expected to feel relief, and I didn't. And so I was like, okay, what's going on? And that's when I took all those time management books off my shelf and thought, well, I guess I better just get more productive, which was like early advice in the pandemic. Do you guys remember that? You know, people were saying like, now's the time to reorganize your garage and, you know, get your memoir written and I don't know, whatever projects that you've been putting off and postponing, now's the time to do it. And I fell hook, line, and sinker for all of that. And so I was like doing all of that. You know, I was organizing my pantry. I was organizing my garage. I was, you know, writing very, very long list of all these things that I was going to be able to do. And in addition to reading all the time management books of how I was going to get it all done. And it wasn't helping. It wasn't solving anything. In fact, I felt like way, way, way worse, you know? And I think that just started a learning curve for me. I mean, eventually, I would say about 6 months in, and I live in Toronto, so it's been a very restrictive environment here. I would say that we've really lived about 2 years of pretty serious restrictions. I think that one thing that I did, for example, to sort of push back on that anxiety was to just take up some different spiritual practices. And one of them was like the ancient practice of the Christian church, which is to pray the hours. And, you know, it was kind of like, okay, well, these time strategies aren't working. Maybe I should try another. Maybe I should just pray, you know, morning, noon, dinner, evening, as Christians have throughout the centuries. And truthfully, I even started doing that just because I thought it would make time anxiety go away. And then I realized it's just not really even what it's about. Like, I have a way bigger invitation here to think about time with far more faith than I've ever thought about it before. And to actually start to get really serious about my limitations, which is kind of along the lines of Ashley's book. So I feel like the pandemic forced upon all of us maybe a sense of not just the limitations of our time, but the limitations of our will too, because the most popular article in 2021 of the New York Times was the article on languishing. Like, we all felt it. We all sort of felt like, gosh, after so many months, like we just lacked the will and the resolve even to look at those lists, much less kind of make our way through them. And so I would say for me, like, what hope do I have on the other side? I'm kind of a realist, and I think a lot of us, we're going to just go back to our old patterns, because I think there's a certain consolation that we all seek in busyness. I think it makes us think that we matter, to be busy, to be on the go, to get a lot of things done. I mean, we don't just do this because, like, there's something very morally involved in it, of spending our time in productive ways. It reassures us that we kind of earn our real estate in the world. And I think that, we'll have to all sort of engage some different practices if we don't want to fall prey to that.
So before we go into the practices, sorry, Aaron, I got all excited,
No, go for it.
So you hinted at this before, and I want to come back to it because I think it's so powerful. You talked about, just how God sees time almost unlimited. So what's unique about how Jesus treats time versus maybe, I'm not asking you to answer for like Buddha or Hinduism or something like that, but just, how does Jesus treat time that's so unique to even our culture right now? That, because, I think about what you're saying, and Jesus has infinite time, but like Jesus got a lot of stuff done. And so I guess, how are you engaging Jesus, and how does he treat time, just from, the work that you're doing?
Mm-hmm. I think the most fundamental difference between the way Jesus views time and the way that our culture views time is just how long it actually is. I just read a time management book. Oliver Burkeman has written, he's from the UK and has written a lot in The Guardian, and he's written a lot about time management. And so he wrote a book called 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals. And it's this book that's trying to get very realistic about time and its limitations. And I think, there is a sense that Jesus, as God incarnate, faced like the limitations of a mortal human life. There were things that he did not do. There were people that he did not heal. There were world crises that he did not solve in his mortal human life, because his life was even shorter than mine, was even a shorter breath and shadow than mine, having died at 33, and I'm 48, almost 48. So, but the most fundamental difference is that Jesus saw that there was time beyond this life. That there is actually, if to unfurl the ribbon of God's time is to see that it is without end, that it stretches on infinitely. And gosh, you can have a lot of hope and a lot of peace when you know that God's time is longer than yours. I think even, for example, about the things that we might want in our own lifetimes to see happen. Maybe we want them for our children. Maybe we want them for the world, or just for our neighborhoods or for our cities, and we don't see them happening in our lifetime. Well, the hope is that God's time is longer than ours, that God will make time to do things that we would never have time to do. And so I see in Jesus, as I read the Gospels, like a complete lack of hurry. No sense of worry that the time is going to run out, that somehow that he has to fret in order to make sure that he gets through that list that's so important, How does he say, for example, on the cross, that it is finished? The work that God has given to do, it's finished, it's complete. I mean, that can't mean every single person healed and saved from their sin, but the assignment given to him by the Father, that was done. And I think that is what's open to us as Christians, is a settling into that confidence that, my life is a mere hand's breadth, I think is how the psalmist says it. And yet that's going to be long enough for whatever God asked me to do with this life, with these hours, with this body. And it'll be a speck. But God's doing so much more than just me. And so it's paradoxical, really, because on the one hand, it's a great humility. Like my life is so small. And yet it's like a great confidence, and I think courage too, that whatever God gives me to do with each breath, each hour, each day, each year, I'll do it in obedience and by his grace, and knowing that somehow it contributes to this larger project of the kingdom coming and his will being done on earth as it is in heaven.
There's a lot of powerful stuff in there. Thank you. I like that. I think it kind of reminds me sometimes of some of the conversations we have about even, money or other resources like that. When if we view them as having a scarcity and that it's all on us to, control that somehow, and to somehow we have to, I guess everything's on our shoulders, basically. And kind of time is, in some ways, I think time, you referenced it as we can view it as a currency, which I think is true. There's the whole time is money conversation, but even what I think what you were just hitting on, I think was really powerful, is that if time is something we feel like it's all on our shoulders to do, to change the world or whatever, or change our lives, it's all on us, that the clock might run out on us or something. It's different than if you view it as God gave me time. There's there's a liberation in that. And yet at the same time, maybe this is what I wanted to get at, is there can also be there's a lot of responsibility there too. I think there's a freedom in going from time is something it's all on me to figure out what to do with time, versus how do I steward the time I've been given, knowing that the provider, if God wants to take me right now, he will. If he wants to give me another 100 years somehow, like with medical advances, I don't know, he will, so I guess the question I wanted to get to now is, if we view time more as something that we're stewarding, from all your conversation, all your writing, your research, what sort of time management principles are good that we should hang on to without getting anxious about them, not letting anxiety come in? But do you have a recommendation on things that we should be gearing ourselves to as far as time management goes? How do we take the good without throwing the baby out with the bathwater?
It's funny because I think it was 1973, there was this very popular time management book, and I don't remember the name of it. I think the name of the author was Alan Laken. And so he basically says, you've got three alternatives in life. You're going to drift, you're going to drown, or you're going to decide. And in that kind of trinity of verbs there, I think there's something for us there. I think on the one hand, I want to say we don't always actually get to decide. I mean, obviously time management is this whole industry and genre of literature to kind of help people decide, help people make better decisions with their hours, with their days, help them align their intentions, their life goals and purposes with what they're actually doing. And there's something really good about that. I actually think there's something really good about that. I think there's just that what we need to say is that we just don't always get to decide. Anybody who's faced the last 2 years understands that we don't get to decide. We don't get to decide when there's a global pandemic. We don't get to decide when there's war. We don't get to decide when there's illness, or when there's a life crisis of another sort that just kind of doesn't allow us to like craft this perfect life, and get through our to-do list every day. But I do think there's something to say, like, we don't want to drift through life either. I think that Saint Ignatius, just honestly, people throughout Christian history have been saying, let's try to decide wisely. Let's not just drift through life. Let's articulate what it means to be a follower of Jesus. What are the values of the kingdom? How do you plan and prioritize your life in line with that? And I think that the intentionality of time management is what I've always really loved about it. I think I came from a family where we weren't very intentional. And I think I sort of watched that and I didn't like that. I wanted to live my life with a lot more intention. I wanted to be able to say, if something matters to me, like I will actually like put it in my calendar. I'm going to, as far as it depends on me, try to live into a value, not just like say it with my lips. When Jesus says, these are people who honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. We could then probably by extension say, if we shouldn't just honor God with our lips, and if we're honoring with him with our hearts, like that's going to matter for our pocketbooks. It's going to matter for our calendars too. And so I don't think the answer is to just say, well, time doesn't matter. And, we're off the hook. We're just receiving the hours from God. The cool thing that I didn't expect to happen in this book is how much interest I developed in wisdom literature, just the ancient wisdom literature of the Bible, which is this whole genre that isn't really just the thus saith the Lord of the prophets, or the commands of the law. It's really like, here are some principles for why living well, the art of living well, as one scholar puts wisdom. And so how do you apply that to your life? And I think that's the task for every human being. And I think it's a task for every Christ follower. And 100% it involves how you spend your time.
Can I jump in real quick here, Peter?
Aaron,
Okay.
you're on a roll, man. He is on fire.
No, it's a great topic and a great conversation. I'm really enjoying this. So I, before we got on this podcast, I was looking up some of your things you've done in the past, and I saw an article from Christianity Today about 5 years ago on bailing. Thou shalt not bail, or something like that, which I thought was really fascinating. And I don't want to take us too far off topic here, but I think there's a connection. I'm curious, do you think that I think there is a bailing problem in our, people bailing out on each other, make schedules and then not, I think you referenced in that article, there was a time when we didn't have cell phones and, you couldn't easily just text somebody. Like if you left a message on someone's answering machine with a payphone, you're hoping that person's coming to see you at this X time or whatever. I don't know. But otherwise you're going to be sitting at that payphone for a while. But I guess, do you think that issue in our culture, is that related to people drifting? Is it related to people who are drowning in time, or do you think there's a deciding problem there on how we're spending our time? I'm curious. That's how I was going to connect it back to our...
Yes. Yes to all three. I think that's a really good question. Let's talk about the drowning issue. We are drowning in this environment of just complete excess of attention drain, I would say. And so I think time is very closely related to questions of attention. And so when you're talking about people who just lose their way, me included, it's so often because we're just inundated with information. We've got 1,000 things kind of pinging at us at the same time, and it's just hard to focus. And so I think that's very much in line with this conversation. Drowning is a real problem. And I think the technological environment is also always kind of seducing us to believe that more options are better than fewer ones. And really, more options just often lead to overwhelm. And so I think sometimes people bail because honestly, they've just overcommitted and they don't even really have a sense of it until they like get into the moment and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm legitimately overwhelmed. And so there is this notion of saying, you know, time is a very fixed resource and how are we going to spend it? I think that there's honestly this like spiritual practice of calendaring, as my spiritual director calls it. She calls it like the spiritual practice of calendaring. Like literally sitting down with your calendar should be considered a spiritual practice. Like whether it's, you know, the Sunday before the week ahead, or it's, you know, the first of the month for the month ahead, or whether it's, you know, for a year's time, you know, I mean, all these units of time really matter. And when we kind of put those hard questions to ourselves of like, am I doing what really matters? You know, are the things that God's called me to do? Or do these commitments, for example, reflect things that I feel I should be doing because other people think I should be doing them? Or do they reflect, a sense of laziness? You know, like I can't really be involved with X because I don't know, I just can't muster up the will, you know, to do something hard. So the deciding like is a practice, you know, it is a practice that you actually do with your calendar. And we just have to sort of recognize that the environment that we're in, the conditions that people are in right now have to be addressed, not just the will and the decisions, if that makes sense. You know, so to go back to the bailing issue, we could just tell people, stop bailing, which I sort of do, I guess, in that article. Stop bailing. But I think it can be more helpful to say, why does this happen?
Right.
Does it happen because you get yourself overwhelmed? Well, how does that happen? And then sort of like taking it back multiple steps so that people can start to understand the real, I would actually say, cost it takes, the cost of calendaring, because that's what really happens. We have to say no to things, and we don't like that. We don't like to disappoint people, and we don't like to miss out. And we're afraid sometimes that, you know, we might miss out on that really great opportunity. So it's always hard to say no.
So, you know, based on what you just said there, I want to come back to another thing that you said. You said that during the pandemic, you developed the spiritual practice of the prayer of hours. You've talked about, you even said that there's a spiritual discipline of calendaring from your spiritual director. So
I like that, by the way. I thought that was really cool.
I like that too. I think we're going to do that. So you've also written a book called A Habit Called Faith. And I guess I want to join these things all together because, you know, I think that we have this idea that if we read our Bible for 3 months, that we're going to hit Eureka. And it just seems like, even from what you're talking about, making the right choices, not just willingness to do it, putting it on the calendar, but that we need to have a realistic approach to our time and also those spiritual habits that are going to change us. But we might not feel like, you know, we're a Jen Pollock Michelle after reading the Bible for 3 months, like, you know, quoting things like that, like, especially if we've never done it. So I guess, how do you help people, you know, who like want to put these habits in their life, they want to change, but like, again, it's the time thing. How do you help people kind of say, hey, there's a bigger picture to this, it's worth staying in, but also holding that tension of not, there's some of us here, like I've been reading my Bible every day since 4th grade. Now, I say that for the unhealthy reason of I was scared that Jesus wasn't going to love me because I grew up in a Christian. So there's another side to that. But I guess in relation to time, in relation to habits, what's the best way to have that relationship, but also with eternity, dare I say, just the long view for people?
Mm-hmm. The language of habit, I think, is really, really helpful to sort of marry that with faith. You know, I think people don't put faith in the category of habit. You know, faith, they kind of think is maybe that mountaintop experience. It's sort of what explodes when you get the epiphany and you see Jesus, miraculously transformed, and you're there with Peter, James, and John, And so I think one thing that we always have to do is sort of like reset our expectations. Faith is a little bit more like exercise, I mean, sometimes you wake up and what you can't wait to do is, get to the gym or take your walk or whatever it is, I mean, we don't all have to be CrossFitters. You could just commit to moving every day, and that's really beneficial for your health. And sometimes you want to do that. Like, for example, let's just say that you're a walker and you like to walk your dog. I have a dog. And that's kind of your goal, is just to get yourself moving every day. Well, some days, the sun is shining and you cannot wait. And it's the first spring day and the crocuses are peeking up out of the ground. And like this, I mean, it's not hard. You lace up your shoes and you just can't wait. And then other days, like it's raining or it's snowing, or you just, you went to bed late and you don't feel like doing it. And it's the value that kind of drives the decision, not the mood. And I think that we really have to sort of say that the mood is just not always going to suit in our spiritual lives. We're not going to always feel like we want to read our Bible, and we're not always going to feel like we want to pray. We're not going to feel like we want to show up to church. And really, we're not, and sometimes we're going to get really discouraged when we're doing those things and they're not producing the benefit that we think that they should. But, for example, let's see, we'll go back to exercise. I remember I actually started to get really regular at exercise when I read this article right around the time I turned 40. And they said, you really see the benefits of exercise, of midlife exercise, like at the end of your life. It's the benefits of exercising in your 40s and your 50s. Like, you're going to feel it now too. I mean, obviously there's benefits now, but like there are a lot of long-term benefits for that. And I honestly think that faith is very much the same way. I had been reading my Bible every day because I became a Christ follower when I was 16. And then my dad died when I was almost 18. And then my brother died when I was almost 23. And, then I was married and my husband was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when we were in our early 30s. And they're just these life can toss you some curveballs, and it can be a lot harder than you expect. And the thing is that when you have a habit established, it's there for you exactly when you need it. All of that time that you've spent filling up on the truths of who God is. Like, you're going to be late to the game when life kind of turns a corner and heads somewhere unexpected. But if you've been doing that for 5 years, maybe you didn't need to know that God would be with you through the valley of the shadow of death. But having read that, I read that every year in my Bible reading plan. And then the 7th year is the year that you miscarry. And it suddenly becomes so real to you. I mean, I think this is why faith, the habits of faith are so important. Because they prepare us, they equip us, they strengthen us to become the kind of people who can meet those moments. And not just meet them because we're somehow like superheroes, but because we now have the habit of walking with Jesus, of hearing his voice, of knowing his presence, which is what all spiritual practices are meant to lead to. They're not the ends. They're always a means to friendship with Jesus, which is where our hearts are really most satisfied.
Jen, I have to ask, I mean, you walked through some very personal, I think you said your dad died, your brother died, your husband got diabetes, got diagnosed with diabetes. I'm not sure, but it sounds like you had a miscarriage. Is that, you brought, so I guess if I was a listener, and I mean, why didn't you stop those habits? Because you make it sound like these habits were helpful. So, I mean, did you feel like quitting? Did you feel like, hey, is this worth it? I mean, why not stop?
I guess I'd have to just go back to exercise. Like, I started exercising regularly about 8 years ago, and like, it's just now this kind of taproot in my life. You know, it's just there. It's like a bedrock foundation. And I think the same is true for spiritual habits. Like, I am now no longer at the point that I wake up and think, I mean, there are days, sure, that I might not want to like sit down and read my Bible, but most of the days, like, I am running to that chair. I am running to that chair. I'm running to lay before Jesus all of my longings, all of my sighings. That just happened to be a psalm that we talked about this last weekend. All of my longing is before you. My sighing is not hidden from you. I mean, you don't have to force yourself to do things that actually you know to be of benefit to you. And see, you can't know the benefit until you've like accumulated the habit, until the habit is like paid its dividends over the years. So it's not to say that those times weren't hard and maybe I didn't sometimes show up going, why, God? You know, why? What are you doing? And, you know, so many of the Psalms sound just like that. Why have you forsaken me? Where have you gone off? Or do you hear my cries? You know, answer me, Lord. So it's not like it didn't sound like that sometimes. But I guess I just developed the habit, not just of doing it, but believing that there was someone on the other end of the line. Like, it was like I had enough history to know that God really was good and that he was listening. Like, it actually became a lifeline in those seasons. And I can remember mentoring college students years ago. A couple college girls lived with us for a little while, just for a summer. And I remember telling them, like, now's the time that you're young to develop these habits, because you just don't know the lifeline that they will be for you in the future when you meet those moments. And also when you just sustain just the everydayness of life too. You need them for that just as much.
Oh. No, that's good. I have a follow-up question on that. There's a lot of good stuff there. But I wanted to get this in real quick because I don't want to miss it. What was that super small second that you mentioned earlier on in the podcast that we can measure time by? It wasn't like a nanosecond. It was like even smaller than that.
Oh, zeptosecond.
A dectosecond?
Zeptosecond.
Dectosecond. All right.
Zepto, like with Z.
Oh, Zecto. Okay.
Zepto. Yeah. I think it's the time. Go ahead.
No, please. I want to know about it because I want to start measuring my meetings in zectoseconds. Oh, okay.
It's something literally like some physicist right now is just going to cringe when I try to explain this. But from what I remember, it was like the time it takes like an electron to travel through an atom, or it was something like that, like one of the parts of the atom to travel across it. Like, that's how short this time of this unit of time really is. So yeah.
I feel
but
like
again, I could have the details on that wrong, but it's something generally like that.
We won't hold you to it, but you know, if any physicists call in, I'll send them to Peter so he can talk to them. I just wanted to start and scheduling my meetings and make them only last a few of those.
In zeptoseconds.
Right. But okay, so seriously though, following up on what you were talking about before, maybe it's related to these seconds also. I was thinking while you were talking about that, if someone is, I'm going back to you had brought up the idea of drifting, deciding, drowning. So if someone is I was just curious, like, what would you, when you've been exploring what are good ways of time management, how do we manage time in a God honoring, Christ honoring way? Is there something practical you would suggest to someone who feels like they're on the drowning end of that spectrum? And also on the other side, someone who, you know, if they take a hard look at themselves, feel like maybe I've been drifting for a little while. Like, what's one thing they could do on each of those people to kind of get their habit, the good habit going?
First thing I would say is take a social media fast. And I would say probably get really honest, even maybe get some serious parameters around how you use your phone. You could do TechWise Family, for example, like they do like an hour, the phone is off an hour a day a week a year. I think we're doing the Common Rule right now with our small group, which is wonderful too. And he talks about going to scripture before you ever even pick up your phone. One of the things that this is another habit that developed for me during the pandemic, kind of unintentionally. I honestly don't even know how it happened, but I started to just turn my alarm off on my phone, and then I would just leave it beside my bed, and then I would go downstairs and I wouldn't even look at it. I would, for like an hour and a half, I'd just meet with Jesus, exercise, make my coffee. And I cannot tell you what that habit has done for me, because all of a sudden it's like I'm sort of it's just an attention practice as much as it is a time practice. I think what people, when they're in this kind of mode of like, I'm drowning, I'm drifting. Well, you're drowning because everybody's competing for your attention, so, and you're drifting because everybody's competing for your attention. So you've got to kind of close yourself off a little bit, and then you've got to channel. You got to like turn the dial to start listening to what God says. You have to be ruthless about that. I really do believe. I mean, there's a reason why Jesus said, if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off. Don't dilly-dally about these things. And I think technology is just a huge part of this. I notice, for example, like a lot of my anxiety sometimes is related to technology, because like I'm always sort of in this mode of thinking I should be doing things faster, because like my phone can always do things faster. And as soon as I like set it aside, like I kind of like re-enter the real world of like my body. Well, it has its pace, and the day has its pace. And honestly, even to be more open to the interruptions of my real world, not just the interruptions of my phone. Like once you add the interruptions of your phone to the interruptions of like real life, you're drowning. And so I think being ruthless about your technology is a really good first step.
That's great.
Before we get to our last question, I read a study by Barna that the question from Generation Z about Christianity is it true? It's, does it work? And so I think what I'm hearing from you in this focused on time management and time anxiety, what you're saying is Christianity works in ways that you just can't see or understand until you've experienced it. Is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm. I'm absolutely saying that. I'm saying there's a reason why Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, which of you by being anxious can add a single hour to his life? I'm saying that our time anxiety is super old, and it's much deeper, and it's never going to be answered by a time hack. Even if you do get a kind of, I don't know, get better habits around your calendar, for example. Like there are still these like really, really deep time anxieties, all of us, and Christianity actually orients us to a wisdom that helps us to number our days well. That's how Moses prays in Psalm 90. He says, you're from everlasting to everlasting. Like you were here before the mountains were even formed. Teach me to number my days, so that I can gain a heart of wisdom. I think that's what human beings really want. I think they want to be living in congruence with what really matters. Nobody wants to be wasting their time, and certainly nobody wants to be wasting their life. And Christianity is actually telling you that not only could you not waste your life, but even though your life is short, there's so much more time ahead. I can just tell you this quick story. I was working on this book, and my contractor, who's done some work on my house, who's doing some work on my neighbor's house. And I saw him one morning, and I could tell that he was upset, and he crossed the street, and I said, what's wrong? And he said, I have cancer. I have 3 spots, on my liver and my lungs. Like, I don't think I have very much time. And so I was literally getting in the car to take my kids to school. And I said, okay, are you going to be here in like 15 minutes? Just wait. I'm going to make you a cup of coffee. And we're going to sit in the backyard. And so I came back, we did, and that's exactly what I said. He said, I can't believe this. I just want more time. I want more time with my kids. I want more time with my grandkids. And I said, you know what? Time always runs out on us in this life. But there's more. Like there is more in eternity. There's a life beyond this life. And it was just this amazing opportunity, like around this question of like, I just want more time, to be talking about the hope of the gospel. So I absolutely think that Christianity is not just true, but that it's so deeply resonant with our most human longings and desires.
Wow. So that's a great place to close with our last question, which is, what does Jesus have to say about this topic? So Jen, what we do is Aaron and I answer, and then you get to like clean up any heresy or anything we get wrong.
Okay.
Does that sound good? So
Perfect.
Aaron, why don't you get us started? What does Jesus have to say about this topic?
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for this. This is a great conversation. And I do think it's an important conversation for everybody, and particularly for followers of Christ. I think Jesus does care about our time a lot. You quoted some great scriptures earlier, and I think there's something powerful to the idea of that we do have limited time, but we don't have to be a slave to the time. We don't have to be worried about the time. We don't have to be anxious about the time. That's really, at least, for me, that's hard. But we don't have to be worried about it, because we know someone who is bigger than that time. And like you said, there's so much more. I do also think that, I think Jesus really cares about how we spend our time. And you had mentioned technology earlier. I think there are lots of distractions in our lives, whether it's technology or whatever. It could be other things too, but that are not. If we were to really stop and really maybe spiritually have the practice of calendaring, we might actually think like, well, maybe that's not what I need to be spending the limited time, or not stewarding the time. Maybe that's not what I need to be doing. So I think there's a lot there to think about and dig into. And short answer is, I do think God cares about it, because He gives us the time. It's something He gives us to steward.
No, I love that. The whole time you were talking, Jen, I was thinking about my friend Sherwin, our mutual friend Sherwin. He loves to say, he tells us, we plant trees whose shade we'll never experience. And when I think about this question of time, a lot of productivity, and I'll just confess, for my productivity, the reason why I relate more with Jen, but I need to listen to someone like Ashley, is like, it's selfish. It's, I want to check the box. I want to get it all done. And that's very, very self-centered. And I think what you're saying is that the gospel is this beautiful message of good news that your days do matter, not just in the immediate, but in the eternal. And so that causes us even to look at our time. I have a 4-year-old and I have a 1-year-old, and they are, I am gratefully that they are inefficient. Just any little task, but I think that that's a little reminder that we're not just called for this life, but for other lives, and for the impact that we have. And my daughter the other day, she looks at me and she goes, "Let's read a Bible story because of this." And like, you have to honor that, like, that's inefficient to what I wanted to do, but that was a little interruption of God kind of working in. And I think even what you're saying is, when you have a better view of time, none of us want to leave this world without influencing loving others. Like, we believe love God and love others, but what we're doing is that we're investing in eternity in ways that we can't see. So that's kind of what I'm leaving with.
I'm glad you talked about the tree, because that's kind of the central image to the whole book is Psalm 1. What's the figure for the flourishing life? And it is the tree. And you think about how long it takes for trees to grow. And I'd never even actually thought about, the shade, the canopy. Like, we we don't have enough time to see that grow in our own lives. And so this whole conversation even begs thinking about generations, not just eternity, like it's not just your life or eternity, but maybe generations that you impact. And there's a lot of patience though, that's involved in waiting in your own life to take deep root, as you are the kind of person who meditates on God's law day and night, which is the spiritual practice that's mentioned in Psalm 1. And it takes patience to watch that for other people and to trust that God, you think about trees too. You don't notice that they grow until about 20 years, when you visit a neighborhood and you haven't been there for 20 years, and all of a sudden that's what you notice, right? The trees are so big. And I think that's very much what the spiritual life is like.
Man, that's great. Well, we'll tell you where Jen, you can find her, but I'm just going to hold up the 2 books that I have. I read Teach Us to Want, so you're going to want to get a copy of that. I'm going to be going through A Habit Called Faith. Jen, you said your book comes out in December, and what's the title of it again? Remind us.
Yeah. In Good Time, Reimagining Productivity, Resisting Hurry, and Practicing Peace.
Awesome. And if our friends and listeners want to find you, where's the best place to find you?
Probably the best place. I'm most regularly writing Monday letters to anybody who signs up to receive them. So you can find that at my website, jenpollockmichelle.com. I am an irregular social media poster. So, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter, but you will see very quickly that I'm very fitfully involved there. So probably sign up for my Monday letters, and if you're interested.
Well, thank you so much, Jen. As always, the best place to get a hold of us is to go to whygodwhypodcast.com, subscribe there, and you'll get the email every week with this episode and every other. So, Jen, thanks for joining us. We hope you all have a great day.